many say, finally, this call is done. After President Trump, Mr. Paal, talked to 20 state leaders from different countries, an important call is made with the Chinese president. What's your takeaway from the readouts from two sides?
Well, this is a very welcome development because it helps to put some stability under the U.S.-China relationship and allows the two leaders to engage. If the Trump previous position on one China had been allowed to remain one of doubting or questioning the principle, then it would be impossible for Xi Jinping to have a constructive relationship with Trump. Trump has now taken a more pragmatic approach, and that means a lot of things are possible. I think China has wisely postured itself toward the Trump administration as being flexible and adaptable, so long as these principles are respected. And so now we should see the flexibility and adaptability come into play.
Pragmatism, that's what China is good at, isn't it, Mr. Yang?
Many years ago, I was told by an American professional diplomat say, I always wonder if China and U.S. could be cooperative. At that time, the relation was very bad. He argued. In fact, both Chinese and American people are very pragmatic. But why, whenever the two countries get together, they always dispute each other. So finally, we got a matured model of the relationship, and under which we can implement both the diplomatic, pragmatic ways to engage with each other.
Well, you say it's matured already. Well, let's see. The process has not been that easy, right? I mean, Mr. Paal, you and Mr. Yang probably know better than many of our viewers. Let me just read out some of the media reports. First of all, Mr. Kushner, the advisor and, of course, the son-in-law of Mr. Trump, talked to Chinese Ambassador Mr. Cui Tiankai. And then we see Mr. Michael Flynn talking to the state councilor Yang Jiechi on the phone. And then Michael Flynn and his assistant deliver a letter to the Chinese ambassador, Mr. Cui Tiankai. In between, the daughter, Miss Ivanka Trump, leading her daughter to the Chinese New Year celebration at the Chinese embassy. After all of this, there is a telephone conversation between the two presidents that takes a long time to be arranged. Does that give us any hint, Mr. Paal, about the complexity and the challenging nature of the bilateral relations, particularly at this stage?
Well, I would emphasize the point you make about this stage. The Chinese diplomacy on this set of issues was really quite effective. You had your two top America watchers, Yang Jiechi and Cui Tiankai, deploy their talents to manage a relationship where on their other side of the equation there aren't really people who are knowledgeable about China who are in position yet. So you have a partially filled out administration with differing views coming from the campaign trail and from the newly recruited senior cabinet officers that have to be reconciled. I give high marks to Yang and especially Ambassador Cui for working their way pragmatically and persistently through the confusion that attends a new change of power in Washington.
Mr. Yang also sitting here with us, another Yang. You worked in the Chinese embassy. You also even worked at the Chinese embassy with Ambassador Yang when the state councilor Yang Jiechi was the Chinese ambassador to the United States. You know all of these chaotic situations when the new president comes into power and the communications between the two sides. What does it take to focus on the most important things and make sure that will happen despite whatever rhetorics coming from both sides?
It's a very key question. In my experiences and in all Chinese diplomats who are engaging China-U.S. relations have the same experiences and observations, say whenever a new American president takes into the office, at the very first year, about a year or so, the turbulence, bumpy road about the bilateral relation. But this time, the uncertainty is very unique because we never seen such a situation that the fundamental base, say, one China principle, has been put in a great uncertainty by several terrible indicators sent by the President-elect Donald Trump. So that signals set the very bad starting point of this bilateral first year. And now with the latest phone call between the two presidents, I think the uncertainty has been removed.
Okay.
But now we return to the normal bumpy road about 1 year.
More challenges ahead. That's what you're trying to say. Mr. Paal is also laughing at this point. So let's take a look at this one China policy. Mr. Paal, you worked in Taiwan before. You have many Chinese scholars as friends. You know how important it is for China-U.S. relations. But you also notice, Mr. Paal, very different versions of readouts coming from both the Chinese side and the American side. The American side, with the request of the Chinese President Xi Jinping, President Trump from the U.S. Agreed to honor the one China principle. From the Chinese side, it is much more concrete, it seems, that Mr. Yang, the readout from the Chinese Foreign Ministry, that President Trump fully understands the great importance of the principle, one China principle, and agree that the U.S. government would adhere to the one China principle. Obviously, you see the description differences, but that make much difference at all when it comes to the attitude and the real concrete issues? Mr. Paal.
Well, I think both sides have used their more traditional national characterization of one China. The U.S. always says one China policy. It doesn't say principle, and never defines what the policy is, to maintain a level of ambiguity that allows us to continue to do the things we do on a non-official basis with Taiwan, among other things. And China has always insisted that it's a principle, not a policy, and both sides use those terms, but they don't object to the other using it. That's a pragmatic accommodation between the two.
All right, we're going to back to square one, isn't it, Mr. Yang, as you earlier described. But what about next? Because also in the readout from the White House, very simple. The two have a cordial and also lengthy conversation. They discuss many issues, one China principle, but that's it. The Chinese side, very specific. They talk about, according to the Chinese readout, economy, trade, science, energy, global stability, and also communication. But not necessarily much about politics, not necessarily much about mill-to-mill relations, not necessarily much about how under international system the two will be able to work together. And at the same time, there's a huge difference in the readout. I'm just trying to line up the question, which is the Chinese side talk about this relationship will benefit China, United States, and the international community. And Mr. Paal, you know, in the White House readout, it said it will be beneficial for both United States and China. So you see these verbal differences there. What kind of message, Mr. Yang, do you think these are giving to us about what's the next challenge the two countries probably have to work together about?
Well, it's a complex answer. The good part is the partnership. During the phone call, the two presidents used the common words about partnership. So that reflects the leadership from both sides determined to develop the cooperative rather than confrontational relationship. But in where China gave a more detailed ideas, just you mentioned, so many areas, but the U.S. cautiously avoid, to my observation, cautiously to avoid to indicate which area we could be partner or which area we cannot be partner. But no matter you like or dislike, I think the partnership should cover wide range of issues.
All right, that's of course diplomacy, as we are talking about. Everybody expressing their own versions, but certainly some common grounds have already been indicated. If we take a look at the evolution of China-U.S. relations, we see different presidents of the United States at different times express it in different way. Under President Bill Clinton, for example, China was a strategic partner to the U.S. But George W. Bush, President Bush, had defined China as a strategic competitor of the U.S. at the very beginning. But 4 years later, he acknowledged constructive cooperation between U.S. and China. Under President Barack Obama, China raised the concept of the new type of relations between major powers. And of course, the U.S. have a different way of interpreting it. And Mr. Paal, so what's next? Words are one thing, but the real nature is the most important thing. What is it, Mr. Paal?
Well, I like my friend Yang Xiyu's characterization of returning to the bumpy road. This is a major milestone. We've gotten past the problem that would prevent President Xi from effectively cooperating so long as the principle of one China had not been articulated. But we've got, within the White House, we have 4 different centers on trade policy, lots of campaign promises about working on trade. We don't know where that's going to come out. Now, the fact that Trump had originally raised the issue of one China in the context of a bargain may indicate that going forward, he'll be looking for China to meet its share of the bargain if he accepts one China principle. And again, as I said at the opening of your program, China had shown flexibility and pragmatism in signaling to the new incoming administration that it's ready to work with the U.S. to resolve some of these trade issues, to invest in American infrastructure. As we saw when Jack Ma visited Trump during the interregnum between the election and inauguration, he promised to bring jobs to the U.S. I think Trump wants to see results in those areas. That, I think, was hinted at in the Chinese statement's last sentence.